From the darkness, the shadow reaches out to feed on living creatures' vitality. They can consume any living creature, but they are especially drawn to creatures untainted by evil. A creature that lives a life of goodness and piety consigns its basest impulses and strongest temptations to the darkness where the shadows hunger. As a shadow drains its victim's strength and physical form, the victim's shadow darkens and begins to move on its own volition. In death, the creature's shadow breaks free, becoming a new undead shadowy hungry for more life to consume. It's kind of terrifying, don't you think? The idea that your shadow betrays you, saps away your strength, and breaks off to go hunt others. So the shadow, page 269 of your monster manual, is a CR 1/2. Last video I talked about some underused creatures from CR 0 to CR 1/2, or 0.5, whichever you want to call it. And the shadow was one I hadn't mentioned, but I feel like I should really go over and talk about a little bit more. And the reason being is because when I read over it at first, I thought, man, this thing's pretty devious. Like, here's the stat block right here. But look at it. It's, resistant to acid, cold, fire, lightning, thunder, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks. Completely immune to necrotic and poison. It cannot be exhausted, frightened, grappled, paralyzed, petrified, poisoned, prone, or restrained. And, well, it's a shadow. Armor class 12, HP 16. But the idea that it can move through a space as narrow as a 1 inch wide without squeezing. While in dim light or darkness, the shadow can take the hide action as a bonus action. And sure, the sunlight weakness is great, but look at it. Action. Strength drain. Hit of +4. Damage, 2d6 plus 2 necrotic damage. The target strength score is reduced by 1d4. The target dies if it reduces its strength to 0. Otherwise, reduction lasts until the target finishes a short or long rest. If non-evil humanoid dies from this attack, a new shadow rises from the corpse 1d4 hours later. Again, going off the last video, which I actually recorded not too long ago, it's just the idea that shadows, even though they are a CR half, can be so terrifying to higher levels. Because think about that. A +4 to hit, 2d6 necrotic damage, and it reduces their strength score by 1d4. I mean, if you've got some killer rolls, you're going to sap away a player's strength pretty quick. And the faster you do it, oof. And just think about equipment load. The player that's carrying a lot of things, suddenly he can't wear his armor because he's got that heavy armor, but now he just doesn't have the strength to wear it anymore. So now he's going to be taking penalties. Or maybe he's carrying a lot of stuff, but now his strength has dropped below 10 and all that weight's just too much for his shoulders to bear. I feel like this is one of those moments where I talk about something that's slightly terrifying, even though it can be dealt with very easily. But think of it from a normal person's point of view. Not just, oh, well, my players are this level, they can handle it just fine. Think of it as, from the point of view of a commoner, how terrifying some monsters are, and sometimes not even being able to trust your own shadow. Because your own shadow might not be yours. It might be this creature that's so angry, so hateful towards life that it consumes it and steals it away from anyone it can. The shadow creature is definitely on my list for the top 10 most terrifying creatures that you can probably come across in all of Dungeons & Dragons. Not because of overwhelming size or overwhelming power, but purely because of how simple it is. It's a shadow. How often do you notice a shadow not looking like everything else around it? How often do you notice a shadow move that doesn't match up to what it's attached to? Not very often when you honestly think about it. You might notice it and you think, just my imagination. But think of that more. In a world where magic and monsters are commonplace, that flicker, you might still pass off as just your imagination. You're safe in a city. What monster could possibly get in? The shadow, just one on its own, could cause an entire town to die. Purely from feeding on everyone it can and creating more of its kind. And imagine that, an adventure for your players, coming into a town that's been stripped of life by shadows. And the shadows now stare at them, hungry, wanting more. So the idea again, going off last video of, underrated low CR creatures, the shadow definitely holds its own compared to the others. It's translucent in the fact that it's a shadow. It's beneath you, it's behind you, it's everywhere around you, and if it's dark enough, it can always hide and hide way better than pretty much anyone else. A knife in the dark is terrifying. But what about a ghostly hand that drains away your strength? I feel like that's more terrifying. But nonetheless, that's not all that we're going to talk about. But as far as like the creature's stats and so on. But rather more on that idea of a town stripped away of life by the shadows. How do you prepare that? How do you prepare that for your players? Well, I'll leave that part up to you. Though I, on the other hand, know exactly how to run it. I've done it before, back in, I want to say it was last year. It might have been the year before. But it was with one of my one-shot groups. Essentially, they were going through as exterminators for the paranormal. And I figured, shadow creatures would be a pretty good start for, level 1 adventure. Boy, was I wrong. Because I killed 2 of the players, not even a lie. Out of the 5 players, 2 of them were dead before the end of the adventure. And the reason being is that I honestly did not account for the fact that the players would never have suspected the shadows until the very end. I gave out hints constantly, and I'm constantly reminded of it because of this, of the fact that when it comes down to it, when giving out hints or puzzles to your players, look for those that are easy. And I'm not saying all players are stupid, it's just, you as the dungeon master, you create these puzzles and you try and be as clever as possible so that way you can try and challenge your players, but unfortunately sometimes they just ain't that bright. And it happens to everyone. Sometimes when you're the player, you're just not thinking in the right way or thinking in the same way as your dungeon master. And because of that, as well as just shadows, there's nothing too paranormal about shadows. So the shadows move. There's flickering lights all around us. They're going to move. Okay. So yeah, in that paranormal activity adventure, it lasted, I want to say, we did about 4 different sessions in that setting. But that first one, I killed 2 of the players because, the shadows got to them. The town that they were in was dealing with these problems that people were dying left and right of very strange causes, and they no longer cast shadows when they died. It was very strange. So the players thought that someone was stealing their shadows and therefore stealing their life essence from them. So they went on this whole thing of, trying to find out who was stealing the shadows and all that. And they definitely uncovered a number of other things, and I did throw them a few bones as far as this one person died and he was so hateful and angry that he swore vengeance against everyone else that when he died, he no longer casted a shadow. So I gave them who was the source of them. But the players just never thought about, using the abilities they had to essentially check every shadow that looked different or strange or acted weird. And so 2 of them died, and that's when they figured out, oh, the shadows. Troubles of being a dungeon master. Nonetheless, thank you guys for joining me for this D20 Sundays. I'll catch you next time.